Zenobia Wade never imagined her humiliation would begin with a whisper, soft, sharp, and poisonous enough to split the world she had carefully built. She was 58, a mother, a seamstress, a woman who believed she had paid more than her share of life's debts. But on the night of her son Marcellus's engagement celebration, all those debts returned with interest. She had arrived early to the banquet hall, wearing a deep plum dress she had stitched herself. It was elegant, modest, and made her feel like she still belonged somewhere. She stood near the back wall, observing the glowing chandeliers and the carefully decorated tables. Everything screamed money, her future in-law's kind of money, not the type earned with calloused hands and sleepless nights bent over a machine. Marcellus looked handsome in a charcoal gray suit she had tailored just 2 weeks earlier. He moved through the room with confidence, greeting guests, laughing too loudly, fitting perfectly into a world she could never claim as her own. Then came Lyra Hanover, Marcellus's soon-to-be mother-in-law. Lyra approached with a bowl in her hand, her posture straight as a blade. Her dress shimmered gold, matching her perfectly manicured fingers and her icy, practiced smile. Zenovia's breath caught in her throat, but she forced a polite nod. "Mrs. Wade," Lyra said coolly, "I believe you dropped something." Before Zenobia could respond, steaming broth struck her face with a violent hiss. A burning shock spread across her skin as the thick turmeric stew dripped down her cheeks and soaked into the neckline of her handmade dress. She gasped, not from pain but from disbelief. A collective gasp rippled through the hall, chairs scraped, utensils froze mid-air, every eye turned toward the spectacle. Lyra lowered the empty bowl, her lips curving into a satisfied smirk. "That," she said in a calm voice heavy with judgment, "is exactly what someone like you deserves." But the deeper burn came next. Marcellus stepped forward, not to defend her, not to shield her, not even to ask if she was hurt. He folded his arms across his chest and said in a firm, chilling tone, "She's right, Ma." Zenobia felt something inside her split, not loudly, not with drama, but cleanly, quietly, like fabric tearing under too much tension. She did not scream. She did not collapse, she did not beg. With trembling dignity, she took a linen napkin from the closest table and dabbed the burning stew from her skin. The pain was sharp, but it anchored her, sharpened her, awakened something in her she didn't know existed. She lifted her chin, turned her back on all of them, and walked toward the exit. But before she stepped into the night, she paused. She reached into her clutch, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number she had saved months ago but prayed she'd never need. When the line clicked open, she whispered 3 words, "It has begun." Then she ended the call, pushed open the glass doors, and vanished into the cool night air, leaving behind a room full of silent witnesses who had no idea what storm she had just set in motion. Before you judge Zenobia, understand this: betrayal is never born in one moment. It grows quietly in the shadows. And to know why she made that call, you must know what came before. 3 years before the night of the stew, Zenobia Wade's life had been simple, predictable, and most importantly, hers. She lived in a modest but sunlit apartment on the east side of Atlanta. Mornings smelled of fresh bread from the little Jamaican bakery downstairs, and evenings carried the soft hum of her sewing machine, her oldest companion. Her sewing shop, Wade's Stitches, sat on the building's ground floor. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work: wedding hems, church robes, school uniforms, the occasional custom suit for someone who preferred handwork over factory stitching. Zenovia's fingers had memorized the language of fabric the way a pianist knows keys, instinctively, lovingly, painfully. She had raised Marcellus alone from the time he was 6. His father had slipped out quietly one winter night, leaving behind only a note and a leather belt Zenobia burned the next morning. From that moment, she promised herself she would never depend on anyone again, not for money, not for comfort, not for survival. She became both shelter and storm, soft enough to nurture her son, strong enough to shield him. Marcellus saw it all. He witnessed her falling asleep at the sewing table. He heard her murmured prayers during power outages. He watched her smile through exhaustion because she refused to let him see despair. And Marcellus had loved her for it deeply, openly. When he graduated high school, he hugged her so tightly she thought her ribs would crack. "One day, Ma," he'd said, "I'll give you the world you deserve." Zenobia believed him. At college, Marcellus studied architecture, a field he adored. Every few days, he called her, sometimes twice a day. He sent voice notes of late-night study sessions, sketches of buildings he dreamed of designing, pictures of cheap takeout meals he wished she could taste with him. Then one semester, everything shifted. He began mentioning a girl, not a girl I like, not someone I'm seeing, but Lena Hanover, the name spoken with awe, fear, and ambition all tangled together. Lena came from a well-known Atlanta family, one with old money and newer scandals. Zenobia had heard the surname before: Hanover Investments, Hanover Tech Park, Hanover State. But it was Lena who changed Marcellus. It was her mother. The first time he spoke of Lyra Hanover, Zenobia felt a faint chill. She couldn't explain why. "She's intense," he had said, "elegant, sharp, but she likes me, Ma. She says I have potential." Potential, that one word set a crack in Zenovia's heart because she had spent her life proving that a person without money could still have worth. Marcellus's visits home became less frequent than rare. He began dressing differently: sleek shoes, designer watches he insisted were discounted, a confidence that was somehow less warm and more performative. When he finally brought Lena home for a brief afternoon tea, she was polite but distant, her eyes scanning Zenovia's modest apartment like she was assessing property value. She complimented the sewing machine, calling it vintage, almost charming, and asked if Zenobia had considered relocating somewhere more modern. Behind her smiled Lyra Hanover, appearing unexpectedly, stepping into Zenovia's doorway without knocking, as though she owned the air in the room. That was the first day Zenobia saw the true threat, wrapped in silk, dripping diamonds, and hiding venom behind a courteous smirk. As Lyra left that afternoon, she gave Zenobia a long, assessing look. "You've done well with what you had," she said. It sounded like praise, it landed like a warning. But Zenobia didn't yet understand the depth of Lyra Hanover's obsession or how tightly Marcellus was already tangled in the web. To see the trap clearly, we must go back to the dinner that changed everything. The dinner invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered not by Marcellus but by Lena herself. She walked into Zenovia's shop as if stepping onto a stage, perfume floating ahead of her, heels clicking in a sharp, rhythmic warning. "Mrs. Wade," she said with that thin, practiced smile, "Mother would love to host you for dinner. She says it's important we blend our families properly." Zenovia didn't miss the implication behind the word properly. Still, she accepted. She would do anything for her son, even walk into a home where she knew she would be judged the moment she stepped inside. The Hanover residence was less a house and more a statement, a sprawling modern mansion with glass walls, imported marble floors, and a driveway that sparkled like a runway. It was the kind of home built to impress, not to live in. Marcellus met her at the door, looking simultaneously proud and nervous. "Ma, you look beautiful," he said, but his eyes darted over her dress as if checking whether it met invisible standards he hadn't grown up with. Inside, Lyra Hanover waited near a towering fireplace, wearing an ivory gown that shimmered like moonlight. She offered Zenobia a kiss on the cheek, one of those airy, empty gestures that never actually touch skin. "Zenobia," Lyra said softly, "how delightful to finally welcome you." Delightful? Zenobia felt no delight in her tone, only calculation. Dinner was served by staff who moved silently and efficiently. Lyra didn't acknowledge them except to snap her fingers for refills or adjustments. The table was set with bone-white china and gold utensils that looked too heavy for comfort. Zenobia sat at the far end. Lena sat beside Marcellus. Lyra sat at the head. She dominated the conversation effortlessly, as though she were giving a lecture rather than hosting a dinner. "We're planning a grand engagement party," Lyra announced. "Something tasteful, nothing too extravagant, of course, perhaps a floral installation flown in from Italy." Zenobia nodded politely, but she heard the message beneath the words, "This world is mine and you will always be a guest in it." When Zenobia complimented the house, Lyra tilted her head. "Thank you, we've always valued refinement. I suppose you don't see much of that in your line of work?" Zenobia stiffened. "Owing is an art," she said evenly. "A craft," Lyra corrected gently, smiling, "but admirable, truly." Marcellus shifted uncomfortably but didn't defend his mother. As dessert arrived, a delicate, overpriced custard, Lyra leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Zenobia, I'm very fond of Marcellus. He's ambitious, he has potential, but potential must be nurtured carefully, supported with the right environment." Zenobia inhaled slowly. "He grew up in a good environment." Lyra's smile tightened. "A loving one, perhaps, but love alone doesn't build futures." She tapped the rim of her glass. "Marcellus is entering a new world, and transitions," she paused, letting the silence sting, "require sacrifices." Zenobia understood then. This wasn't dinner, this was a warning, a declaration, an invisible line being drawn between them. When the evening ended, Marcellus walked her to the car. He hugged her, but it was brief, distracted, distant. "Ma, please don't take anything personally," he whispered, but Zenobia already had. As she drove home, the lights of the Hanover mansion shrinking in her rearview mirror, a heaviness settled in her chest. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and she feared she was already losing her son, not to love, but to power. But Zenobia had no idea that this dinner was only the beginning. The real fracture would come weeks later, during the wedding dress appointment that would expose the first real crack in Lyra's perfect facade. The wedding dress appointment was supposed to be a gesture of inclusion, a symbolic moment where mothers, daughters, and future in-laws bonded over lace and silk. At least that's what Zenobia told herself as she arrived early at the boutique, smoothing the sleeves of her hand-stitched cardigan. The boutique itself was the kind of place that smelled of champagne and quiet judgment. Dresses hung like clouds suspended in glass, their price tags discreetly tucked away as if the numbers might offend the fabric. Zenobia chose a simple velvet seat along the wall, clutching her purse tightly. Lena arrived 20 minutes late with a flurry of perfume and giggles. Two friends trailed behind her, each armed with a phone, ready to record every angle of her trying on dresses. And then, like a queen making her entrance, Lyra Hanover swept in, silver heels clicking, diamonds whispering against her neck. "Ah, Zenobia," Lyra said with soft surprise. "You're early?" Early, she had been invited, yet Lyra spoke as though seeing her here was an inconvenience. Lena began trying on gowns immediately, ball gowns, mermaid silhouettes, delicate lace pieces flown in from Europe. Each time, the room erupted with applause and exaggerated squeals. Zenobia kept her thoughts to herself, though she had spent 35 years understanding fabric better than most designers. Then Lena stepped out in a strapless silk gown embroidered with tiny pearls. "What do you think, Mom?" she asked Lyra. "Darling, you're breathtaking," Lyra declared. "What about you, Mrs. Wade?" Lena turned, eyes expectant. Zenobia took a breath. "It's beautiful," she said gently, "but the strapless cut isn't the best support for your shoulders. A gown with a soft sleeve or a structured strap would balance your shape better." Lena froze. Her friends exchanged looks. The room stiffened. Lyra's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "Zenobia," she said lightly, "trends evolve. Young women today prefer modern cuts. They aren't restricted by conservative tastes." A polite insult wrapped in satin, Lena laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, maybe strapless is more fashionable." Her friends nodded vigorously. Zenobia felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from disappointment. She wasn't offended for herself. She was hurt that Marcellus had aligned himself with people who cared more about appearances than sincerity. After the dress was chosen, without any further input from her, everyone began discussing accessories and venue themes. No one spoke to Zenobia for nearly an hour. When they finally stepped outside, Marcellus was waiting on the curb. Brightened as he saw Lena but barely glanced at his mother. "How was it?" he asked. "Wonderful," Lena said, hugging him. "Your mom gave her opinions and everything." Her tone suggested Zenobia had done something inappropriate. Marcellus turned to her. "Did you have fun, Ma?" Fun. She wanted to tell him she had felt invisible. She wanted to confess she didn't belong. She wanted to scream that Lyra was tightening her grip around his life like a vine, but she only forced a small smile. "It was nice." Lyra stepped forward, linking her arm through Lena's. "We're heading to lunch, Marcellus. Come along, we have many decisions to finalize." Then she turned to Zenobia with a smile sweet enough to rot fruit. "Zenobia, I'm sure you're tired. Wedding planning can be overwhelming for people unfamiliar with it." Marcellus opened his mouth, but no defense came. So Zenobia simply nodded and stepped back, watching them leave, the three of them laughing, planning, dreaming a future she was slowly being pushed out of. She walked to the bus stop alone. But Zenobia didn't yet know the truth. This icy exclusion was nothing compared to the storm that was coming. A storm triggered by a single delivery, a manila envelope that would break her world open. The manila envelope arrived on a rainy Thursday, slipped halfway under her shop door, soaked at the edges, its paper warped from the damp evening air. Zenobia noticed it while closing up, sweeping stray threads from the floor. At first, she assumed it was another client request or measurements left behind, but something about its weight, too thick, too deliberate, made her pause. Her name was written across the front in neat looping cursive. Not Mrs. Wade, not Zenobia Wade, just Zenobia. Only a handful of people ever called her that. She locked the shop door, turned the sign to closed, and sat at her sewing table before opening it. The rain tapped steadily against the small window, punctuating each breath she took. Inside were photographs, dozens, glossy prints, some folded at the corners, others freshly developed. At first, she wasn't sure what she was looking at, then her heart stumbled. Marcellus, standing in a restaurant, smiling, holding hands with a woman who was not Lena. A petite brunette with soft curls and a smile so genuine it made the world look gentler. The photos showed them sitting close, laughing, leaning in with a familiarity that came only from shared secrets. One photo caught them mid-conversation, Marcellus's eyes brighter than she'd seen them in months. Zenovia's breath trembled, but the last photo, it froze her completely. It was a picture of Marcellus outside the Hanover estate, speaking with Lyra, except Lyra's expression was not warm or approving. It was cold, calculating, almost threatening. Marcellus looked tense, defensive. On the back of this photo, someone had written 3 words in black ink: "She knows everything." Zenovia's pulse thudded in her ears. She gathered the photos, searching desperately for a note, a signature, anything that explained who sent them, but the envelope was otherwise empty. Her mind raced. Was Marcellus in trouble? Was Lyra blackmailing him? Was there someone else? Was the brunette woman a friend? Or something forbidden? Zenovia pressed a hand to her chest. She felt a rising dizziness, not of shock, but of recognition. Something inside her whispered that this was the missing piece, the unseen weight that had been pulling Marcellus away. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number straight to voicemail. She tried again, voicemail. She tried Lena, rings, rings. Then a cheerful automated message from a prepaid number. Lena's habit of switching phones like accessories meant Zenovia rarely had the right one. She was alone with the truth she didn't yet understand. She laid the photos across her sewing table, arranging them in a row. A pattern began to form like stitches in a seam she had overlooked. Marcellus's posture, his eyes, his forced smiles around Lena, the tension in the last image, the warmth in the first few pictures. He wasn't happy. He wasn't choosing this life. He was being guided, pushed, reshaped. By Lyra. Why would a wealthy, powerful woman be so invested in molding Marcellus like clay? Zenovia reached for her phone again, this time not to call Marcellus. Instead, she dialed the same confidential number she would call months later, the night of the engagement party, the number she never wanted to use. It rang twice. A familiar voice answered. "You received it," the voice said with no introduction. Zenovia swallowed hard. "What is she doing to my son?" A pause, then quietly, "You're not the only one she's destroyed." The line went dead. Zenovia stared at the phone, her throat tight, her hands trembling. Something dark was moving beneath the surface of the Hanover family, something far bigger, far more dangerous than she had suspected. But before Zenovia could uncover the truth behind those pictures, fate would deliver another blow, a confrontation at a charity gala that would reveal Lyra's true intentions in public, under glittering lights and fake smiles. The charity gala was one of those events that made headlines before it even began. A night woven from shimmering gowns, camera flashes, and whispered competition. It was hosted by the Hanover family, of course, an annual affair meant to uplift the community, though everyone knew it was really a parade of influence. Zenovia hadn't planned to attend, she wasn't invited, but 3 days before the event, Marcellus called unexpectedly. "Ma," he said carefully, "Lena wants you to come. She thinks it'll look better, more united." Look better, not be better. Zenovia hesitated, but she agreed. She still hoped against her own instincts that she could reach her son before he slipped fully into Lyra's orbit. She made a gown for herself in 2 nights, emerald satin, soft draping, refined but simple. She refused to buy something new just to impress people who would never see her as equal. She would go as herself or not at all. The Hanover estate had been transformed for the gala. Strings of lights draped over the gardens, chandeliers hung from temporary pergolas, and a hand-carved ice sculpture shaped like a swan glittered near the entrance. Guests stepped onto a red carpet walkway, smiling for the local press. Zenobia walked alone, ignoring the murmurs. Inside, violins hummed beneath the chatter. Lyra stood near the center of the room, greeting guests with the polished ease of a politician. She wore a crystal-encrusted gown that shimmered like frost under the spotlights. Her smile was razor-thin but charming enough to fool anyone not paying attention. Marcellus approached, adjusting his cufflinks nervously. "Ma, you made it." He kissed her cheek, but it was rushed, like he was afraid someone would see. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. His gaze flickered toward Lyra before he could hide it. "Nothing, let's just enjoy the night, okay?" Zenobia didn't believe him for a second. The trouble began when donations were being announced. Lyra stepped onto the stage, microphone glittering in hand, her posture flawless. "Tonight," she began, "we honor generosity, legacy, and the future of our community." Polite applause echoed. Lyra continued, "And I would like to acknowledge our family's newest addition, my future daughter-in-law, Lena, and the man who has shown extraordinary promise, my future son-in-law, Marcellus Hanover." Hanover, not Wade. Zenobia stiffened, Marcellus flinched. Lyra smiled as if she had just made the grandest gesture. "Marcellus has agreed," she said sweetly, "to legally adopt the Hanover surname upon marriage, symbolizing unity and strength." Gasps whispered through the crowd. Zenovia's heart plummeted, her throat burned. Marcellus hadn't agreed. She could see it. His eyes were wide, his jaw tight, his hands trembling. He wasn't a man proud to take a new name, he was a man cornered. Zenobia stepped forward instinctively, but Lyra caught her gaze like a predator sensing prey. "Of course," Lyra added smoothly, "this transition allows him to step fully into the family legacy. One cannot rise on borrowed platforms after all." Borrowed, borrowed. The word sliced cleanly. Lena clapped enthusiastically, unaware of or indifferent to the tension. Guests murmured approval, their eyes drifting briefly to Zenobia, taking in her modest gown, assessing, measuring. Marcellus finally found his voice. "Mother," he began, but Lyra cut him off with a hand on his arm, gentle, firm, suffocating. Zenobia felt something inside her ignite, not rage, not humiliation, resolve. She stepped into the glow of the nearest spotlight and addressed Lyra directly. "Did you discuss this with my son?" Zenobia asked slowly, "or did you decide for him?" Silence dropped over the room like velvet. Lyra's smile never wavered. "In families of refinement," she said sweetly, "decisions are made for the greater good. Something I'm sure you weren't accustomed to." That was the first time guests looked at Zenobia with genuine discomfort, not pity but recognition. Something ugly had just slipped through Lyra's polished facade. Zenobia held Lyra's gaze, unblinking, then she turned and walked out of the gala, this time not from shame but from calculation. Lyra had just revealed herself publicly, and Zenobia finally understood the danger Marcellus was in. But Zenobia didn't know that as she walked out, someone followed her. Someone who would reveal a secret about the Hanover family that would change everything and explain why Lyra feared losing control. The night air outside the gala was sharp, the kind that bites the lungs. Zenobia inhaled it deeply, letting the cold steady her trembling hands. She wasn't shaking from shame, not this time, but from clarity. Lyra Hanover was no longer hiding her intentions. She wasn't just molding Marcellus, she was consuming him. Zenobia reached the end of the driveway when she heard footsteps rushing behind her. "Mrs. Wade, wait," she turned sharply. It was the brunette woman from the photographs. Up close, she was even younger than Zenobia had imagined, mid-20s at most, soft curls brushing her shoulders, eyes swollen as though she'd been crying for days. Her hands clutched a small clutch bag as though it were the only thing anchoring her. Zenovia's breath caught. "You," Zenobia whispered, "you're the woman in the photos." The woman nodded, lips trembling. "My name is Clarissa, Clarissa Hale." Zenovia's voice tightened. "Why did someone send me pictures of you with my son?" Clarissa swallowed hard, glancing back toward the glowing mansion as though afraid Lyra herself might emerge from the shadows. "Because he wasn't supposed to see me again," she whispered. "And neither were you." Zenovia's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" Clarissa stepped closer, lowering her voice until it was barely more than a shiver of sound. "I didn't want to come here," she said, eyes glistening. "I didn't even know this event was happening until tonight, but I had to warn you." Zenobia frowned. "Warn me about what?" Clarissa's breath hitched. "Lyra Hanover destroys people," she said. "Anyone who threatens her plans, anyone who might take attention, influence, or control, she gets rid of." The words didn't feel dramatic, they felt heavy, lived. Experienced, Zenovia's pulse quickened. "Threatens her control over what?" "Over him," Clarissa whispered. "Over Marcellus." Zenobia frowned deeply. "You're suggesting Lyra hurt you because of him?" Clarissa's chin quivered. "Not just hurt, she ruined me." Zenobia stiffened as Clarissa looked away, as if reliving a memory she'd buried too shallowly. "I met Marcellus a year and a half ago," she began. "Before he was tied to Lena, before the Hanovers started molding him into their project." She shook her head. "We were together, he was kind, real, nothing like the person he's forced to be around them." Zenovia's breath caught, forced. "He loved you," Clarissa continued quietly. "He talked about you all the time. He said you were the strongest woman he'd ever known." Zenobia closed her eyes briefly. The ache in her chest felt like both pride and grief. Clarissa took a shaky breath. "When Lyra found out about us, she called me to her house. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten. She smiled like she was offering me tea." Clarissa's voice broke. "She told me Marcellus was destined for bigger things and that I wasn't suitable." Zenobia asked softly. What did she do? Clarissa looked her straight in the eye. She made sure I would never work in my field again, used her influence to blacklist me from every internship, every program, every opportunity. Zenobia's breath faltered. She erased me, Clarissa whispered, because Marcellus cared about me. And she needed him to depend on her family alone. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Zenobia asked the question she feared. Why show me the photos now? Clarissa's voice trembled. Because she's about to do the same to him. Zenobia felt her knees weaken. To my son, why? Clarissa exhaled shakily. Because he's resisting, quietly but resisting, and Lyra Hanover doesn't accept resistance. Before Zenobia could respond, Clarissa pressed a small flash drive into her palm. You'll need this, she whispered, before it's too late. Zenobia stared at the tiny device, a simple object suddenly heavier than the world. What's on it? She asked. Clarissa stepped back into the shadows. Proof, she said, the kind that can topple Lyra's entire empire. Then she disappeared into the night. But before Zenobia could uncover the truth hidden inside that flash drive, fate would force her into a crisis. The one night Marcellus showed up at her door, bruised, terrified, and finally ready to confess everything. Zenobia barely slept the night she received the flash drive. She placed it on the kitchen table and stared at it for hours, wondering what kind of proof could topple a woman like Lyra Hanover, someone whose influence stretched across half the city. But before she could gather her courage to open it, before she could even decide whether to involve the police or someone she trusted, something happened that shattered every plan and replaced it with fear. It was 2:14 a.m. The knocks came hard, rapid, desperate. Zenobia jolted awake, disoriented, heart pounding. No one visited her this late, not since Marcellus was a teenager and forgot his house key. She rushed to the door, hesitating only for a second before opening it. And then she froze. Mom, Marcellus stood there, breathing hard, eyes bloodshot, shirt torn at the collar. There was a bruise forming along his jaw, dark and angry. His hair was disheveled and his hands shook uncontrollably. Zenobia felt her stomach twist. Baby, what happened to you? He stepped inside and collapsed onto her couch, burying his face in his hands. She knelt in front of him, gently holding his wrists, forcing him to look at her. Marcellus, she whispered, who did this? Tell me. He swallowed, but his voice cracked. I shouldn't have come here. She'll be furious if she finds out. Zenobia felt a chill crawl up her spine. Do you mean Lyra? His silence was her answer. Look at me, Zenobia said, her tone firm. Did Lyra do this to you? Marcellus's eyes filled with tears. He tried and failed to blink away. It wasn't her directly, he said quietly, but it might as well have been. Zenobia's breath caught. What happened? He shook his head, ashamed. I tried to break things off with Lena tonight. Zenobia blinked. Break things off, he nodded. I can't keep living like this, Ma. I hate that life. I hate the lies, the pressure, the pretending. His voice cracked. I haven't been myself for months. Zenobia felt her chest tighten painfully. Lena screamed, he continued. She told her mother, and Lyra, she said I was ungrateful, that I didn't appreciate everything she's done for me. She said I wouldn't survive without their name, their networks, their money. He wiped his face angrily. I told her I didn't want her money. And then, Zenobia whispered. Marcellus hesitated, shame burning his cheeks. 2 men followed me when I left. I thought they were security. I thought they were just making sure I was okay, but when I got halfway down the drive, his voice broke. They told me that walking away would be unwise, that Lyra expects loyalty, that she doesn't tolerate him. Zenobia's hands turned cold. They shoved me, he said softly. Said it was a warning, next time it wouldn't be so gentle. Zenobia inhaled sharply, rage climbing her throat. My baby, she whispered, cupping his bruised face. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want you involved, he murmured. Lyra told me if I chose you, she'd make sure your shop was shut down, that you'd lose everything. Zenobia's heart clenched, of course. It wasn't just control over Marcellus, it was leverage, punishment, ownership. She took his hand, squeezing it tightly. Listen to me, she said, voice trembling but fierce. She can't hurt us, not anymore. I have something now, something that can stop her. Marcellus looked up, confused. What? Zenobia reached for the small flash drive sitting on the table. This, she whispered, proof. His eyes widened. What kind of proof? Zenobia shook her head slowly. I don't know yet. But she could feel it, heavy as fate. This was the key, the weapon, the truth. Before Marcellus could respond, her phone buzzed violently on the counter, an unknown number flashing on screen, a text message, just 5 words. We know he's with you. Zenobia's blood ran cold, but the message was only the beginning. Within hours, Zenobia and Marcellus would discover what was truly inside the flash drive and why Lyra had destroyed anyone who tried to expose her. Zenobia stared at the glowing phone screen as if the words might rearrange themselves into something harmless. They didn't. We know he's with you. The message pulsed like a thread alive in her palm. Marcellus rose slowly from the couch, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. Ma, we need to go. Lyra won't stop, not now. Zenobia shook her head. She had lived her entire life bending, compromising, surviving quietly in the background. But this, Lyra threatening her son, this crossed a line no mother could. No, she whispered, we're not running, not anymore. She walked to the table, picked up the flash drive Clarissa had given her and held it as though it carried the weight of justice itself. Sit, she said gently. We're going to see what she's been hiding. Marcellus hesitated. Are you sure it's safe? Zenobia took a steady breath. Safe? No. Necessary? Yes. She plugged the drive into her old laptop. The screen flickered, then a folder appeared with a single name, Hanover Trust Archive Confidential. Marcellus leaned closer, eyes widening. Zenobia clicked. Inside were multiple files, audio logs, scanned documents, financial statements, private emails, but one folder stood out, Project Archon Internal. Zenobia opened it. The first document was a transaction ledger, hundreds of entries. Funds moved from Hanover charities into private accounts, then rerouted through shell companies. Millions of dollars, money that was supposed to help the community. Marcellus' jaw dropped. She's laundering charity funds through her own foundations. And framing it as philanthropy, Zenobia murmured. She isn't lifting communities, she's pillaging them. But there was more audio file. Archon 047 WAV. Zenobia clicked play. Lyra's unmistakable voice filled the room, calm, cold, businesslike. Marcellus will be useful, young, ambitious, lacking a strong financial background. Once he carries the Hanover name, we can distribute the liabilities across the Wade assets, quietly, seamlessly. Zenovia's breath caught. Marcellus felt the room tilt. Lyra continued, Mrs. Wade's shop is vulnerable. A few zoning violations, tax audits, it would collapse in weeks. She'll comply if pushed. Zenovia's hands clenched into fists. The audio ended. Silence pressed in around them. Marcellus spoke first, voice hollow. She never wanted me, she just wanted my identity, a scapegoat. One to shift her crimes onto. Zenobia touched his cheek softly. Baby, she wanted control, you were just a means to expand it. Marcellus's eyes darkened with something Zenobia had never seen in him before, anger, betrayal, and worst of all, shame. He whispered, I almost let her take everything from you. Zenobia pulled him into an embrace. She didn't take you, that's what matters. But as they held each other, the laptop screen flickered again, another file automatically loading, a video. Zenobia froze. Lyra sat in her office speaking to someone off camera, and then Lena stepped into the frame. Zenovia's breath hitched. Marcellus staggered back. Lena laughed lightly. He really thinks he's breaking things off. Let him. Once he's publicly attached to our family, it won't matter what he wants. Lyra added, good, we'll finalize the legal name transfer during engagement week. Once he becomes Marcellus Hanover, the remaining liabilities can be reassigned. Zenobia felt sick. They were planning to use you as a shield, she whispered, and ruin you financially, legally, publicly if it saved themselves. Marcellus sank into the chair, face pale. Ma, what do we do? Before she could answer, headlights swept across her living room curtains, a car, then another, doors slammed outside. Zenovia's heart lurched, Marcellus's eyes widened. They found us. But what happened next? The confrontation at Zenovia's doorstep would expose the final truth, shatter Lyra's facade, and force a choice neither mother nor son could escape. The knocks came like thunder, hard, deliberate, echoing through the walls of Zenovia's small home. Marcellus jumped to his feet, breath unsteady, eyes darting toward the back door. Ma, we have to hide. Zenovia placed a firm hand on his arm. No, we've spent too long running from shadows. Tonight we face them. Another knock. Then a voice, smooth, icy, unmistakable. Zenovia, open the door. Lyra Hanover. Zenovia inhaled sharply, straightened her spine, and walked to the door with a calm she did not feel. She unlocked it slowly. Lyra stood on the porch beneath the flickering streetlight. Her silver gown from the gala had been replaced by a tailored black coat, her hair pulled into a sleek knot. Two men, her security, flanked her like statues carved from arrogance. She smiled politely. May we come in? Zenovia blocked the entrance. No, say what you need to say. Lyra's eyes flicked past her, noticing the glow of the laptop inside. I see you've accessed my files, unfortunate. Illegal, Zenovia corrected. Strategic, Lyra replied, her tone as smooth as venom. You've put yourself and your son in a very dangerous position. Marcellus stepped forward. Stop pretending you care about us. Lyra regarded him with something like disappointment. Marcellus, you were meant for more. We were shaping a legacy and you would have been at the center of it. Zenovia scoffed. A legacy built on fraud, blackmail, manipulating young people to carry your crimes? Lyra's expression tightened for the first time. She gestured slightly and one of the men stepped forward, reaching into his coat. Marcellus instinctively moved in front of Zenovia, but Lyra lifted a single finger. No violence. She sounded almost bored. Zenovia, she continued, I don't want trouble. Let me take the flash drive. Marcellus comes home with us. We clean this up quietly. Zenovia's jaw clenched. He's not going anywhere with you. Lyra's smile thinned. You don't have a choice. Zenovia stepped closer, lowering her voice with a calm fiercer than fire. Neither do you. She turned the laptop toward Lyra. The video paused on Lyra and Lena discussing the planned identity transfer. I've already sent this to someone I trust, Zenovia lied boldly. If anything happens to us, this goes public. Lyra's mask slipped, just a fracture, but enough. You overestimate your importance, Lyra hissed. This city runs on power, influence, not sentiment. That's where you're wrong, Zenovia said. Communities talk, people listen, and your corruption spreads faster than your lies. The air grew heavy. One of the men shifted. Ms. Hanover, what now? Lyra's eyes narrowed at Zenovia. You think you've won? You think exposing this will fix anything? Zenovia held her stare. I don't need to fix everything, I just need to protect my son. Marcellus stepped beside her, lifting his chin, and I'm done letting you control me. For the first time, Lyra looked genuinely stunned, speechless even. Zenovia took Marcellus's hand and squeezed it. You underestimated the wrong family, she whispered to Lyra. A long, cold silence followed. Finally, Lyra turned sharply on her heel. Let's go, she snapped to her men. One paused. Do we? No, Lyra snapped. Not tonight. Before she stepped into the car, she looked back at Zenovia. This isn't over, Zenovia replied softly. It is for us. Lyra's jaw clenched. She climbed into the car, door slamming with a finality that echoed down the street. The men followed. Within seconds, the fleet of black vehicles disappeared into the dark. Inside the house, Marcellus collapsed into his mother's arms. I'm so sorry, Ma, he whispered. I brought that darkness into our lives. Zenobia stroked his hair gently. You came home. That's all that matters. He pulled back, eyes filled with emotion. What do we do now? Zenobia glanced at the flash drive, then at her son. Now, she said, we reclaim our lives together. Marcellus managed a small, relieved smile. And we expose her? Zenobia nodded slowly. When the time is right and safely, he exhaled, leaning his forehead against hers. I love you, Ma. I love you more, she whispered. For the first time in years, Zenobia felt a different kind of strength, one born not from survival but from victory. Quiet, steady, and unshakable. Lyra Hanover's empire wouldn't fall overnight, but today, Zenobia Wade won her son back.